Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. All right. So page number 287. I'm also sharing the screen. So the 18 elements. The 18 elements. The 18 elements are Chakku, the eye element, ear element, nose element, tongue element, body element, visible form element, sound element, smell element, the taste element, the tangible element, the eye consciousness element, the ear consciousness element, the nose consciousness element, the tongue consciousness element, the body consciousness element, the mind element, the mental object element, the mind consciousness element. Guide to verse 37. The elements are called dhatu because they bear their own intrinsic natures. The 18 elements are obtained from the 12 bases by dividing the mind base into 7 elements of consciousness, right? 7 elements of consciousness. In all other respects, the bases and the elements are identical, right? Except from that division of the mind base, everything pertaining to the elements and the bases are similar, or rather identical. For a correlation of the aggregates, bases, and elements with the 4 ultimate realities, see table 7.4. Now, I just want you to also mark in whatever notebooks you maintain a star or some sort of highlight, because you will have to refer back to this in the future when we do the Dhamma Center, right? Now, in the chart, you will see, let us go through not only the elements, but the others as well. The 4 ultimate realities divided into 4 there, which is matter, 28, mental factors, Chetasika, 52, Nibbana, 1, consciousness, 89, right? 89. The aggregates, khandas, the materiality aggregate, Rupa Skandha, Vedana Skandha, the feeling aggregate, perception, Samya Khanda, formations and the consciousness aggregate. Now it mentions none there under Nibbana, right? Because Nibbana does not have an aggregate. Do you understand why? Right? Nibbana does not have an aggregate. It does not fall into an aggregate there, right? Now, the bases. Under the materiality aggregate, you find the eye base, the ear base, nose, tongue, body, form, sound, smell, taste, and tangibility, right? And you find that the materiality aggregate goes a little bit beyond the classification, the first classifications that we have in the sense bases. That is representing or to denote that in the mental object base, Sukkuma Rupas are present. And that Sukkuma Rupa, right, belongs to, or the subtle matter belongs to the material aggregate. Is that understood, everyone? right? In the mental object base, other than Sukkhama Rupa, we have the mental factors as well as Nibbana. And the mind base exists as a chunk over there, right? Now, if one were to ask you, or if you were to question yourself, or someone was to question you, what is the mind base? Then the answer to that is in the elements, right? They are under it, right? Do you understand? Yeah. So elements 18. The I element, eye, ear, nose, tongue, body, form, sound, smell, taste, tangible elements, right? Element. The mental object element is the same as the above, still includes Sukkhama Rupas, right? Still includes Sukkhama Rupas. Can someone remind all of us what are the Sukkhama Rupas? Hemamali?
Bhante, water element, sexual phenomena 2, heart base, nutriment, life faculty, space, lightness triad, kaya vinyati, and characteristics 4.
Okay. Only the you mentioned what element?
Yeah, what element? Yeah, 1. Yeah.
Can you explain why that is? Where are the other elements?
Because water element is you can't touch. Oh, it's
you can't touch.
I'm not sure, Bhante, the exact word.
Anyone else? Chamari, is Chamari here? Chamari, oh Chamari.
Sorry, yes, Bhante.
Yes.
I think it is a subtle matter because it's water element cannot be felt.
Yes. Okay. It can only be identified by
insight.
By insight and through the other elements. Yeah. The delimitation or the delimitations of water element can only be identified by the other elements.
Okay.
Yeah. All right. So moving on. So does anyone have any questions? Yes, dear. Damsiri?
Yes, Bhante.
Damsiri, we can't hear you.
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Okay.
Not really. Not properly.
But
still,
I'll speak loudly.
Yes.
Okay. The question is actually mind element.
Okay.
Right? What is it? And because it's mentioned in the Patthana only, right? The relationship between the mind element and the mind consciousness element.
Yes.
Can you give us a little bit of explanation, the difference between mind element and mind consciousness element?
Yes. Can also someone remind me the page again, please? 287. 87. All right.
Yeah.
On page 146 table, the 7 consciousness of elements, it gives those. I conscious element, all those, the mind element and the mind conscious element.
Okay.
Because Bhante, I'll add a little bit of that. Because it's explained under Samantara Pachaya. contiguity conditions.
Mhm.
It says the pancha vijnana condition the pancha vijnana condition the mano mind element, and then mind element condition the mind consciousness element.
Mm.
Right? Because there's a relationship between Panchadvarajna and the other one, what do you call the mind element is Panchadvarajna and what is the other component?
Mind conscious element.
No, mind conscious element is different from mind element.
Yeah.
Mind element would be
Yes.
yeah, Mano Dhatu has a triple mind. That means Panchadvarajna and two Sampatijana. But there's a relationship between interrelationship between these Dhammas.
Yes.
That explain only in the contiguity conditions or the samantara pattya. That I don't really understand.
Yes. So when it comes to the mind consciousness element and the mind element, now what are the specific differences that we know in terms of dhammas that comes into play with these two elements? Now Dhamsiri mentioned, Dhamsiri, you said Mano Vijnana Dhatu is the Panchadvara Vajana and the two Sampatichanas. Yes?
So Mano Dhatu. Mano Dhatu.
Mano Dhatu.
Mano Dhatu is the Panchadvara Vajana and the two Sampatichanas. Right? So then what is Mano Vijnana Dhatu?
Mano Vijnana Dhatu is all other consciousness.
Yes.
87, 89 minus 3.
Yes. So now, Dhamsiri, then if we look at the specific difference between then all of those other consciousnesses and the two Sampatichanas and the Panchadvara Vajana, what is the difference, you think? What is the difference you can pick up?
I can say that Panchadvarajana is not caused by vipaka, right? It's action only.
Okay. Okay.
And Sampatijana also, it's an action. It's not as a result of vipaka, right? So I can see that's the main. The rest of the are actually vipaka or action.
But don't the Sampatichanas sit under the vipakas?
Sampatijana does not come under vipaka, is it? As far as I can.
Where does the two Sampatichana Chittas exist?
In the thought process. Sampatijana is actually the when you get an object into your mind, you practically receiving the object, receiving the signal of the object by the mind is by the Sampatijana.
Then why does it not sit on the Kriya Chittas like the Panchadvara Vajana?
Yeah, that's exactly I said. It's action. Actually, the word is Kriya.
Yes.
It's not vipaka.
Why do you say that, Dhamsiri? When we look at the Chitta chart, we find the Sampatichanas under the Vipakas, not the Kriyas. So,
Okay.
Kriya Chityan Yatate, Manodvara Vajana, Manodvara Vajana, Panchadvara Vajana, and Hasatipada.
Okay, yeah.
Right?
I must have, yeah.
Yes, of course. Surely gone above.
All right, okay.
Right?
Yeah.
But okay, let's forget about this. Is more than this is not really about the vipakas and the kriyas, but really about the functionality of the panchadvara vajana and the two sampatichanas. Now you mentioned Damsiri. The function of the sampatichana is essentially simply receiving the object.
Yeah.
Right? And the panchadvara vajana, the function performed by the panchadvara vajana is the adverting of mind to the sensory bases, right? Which then allows the functioning of the rupas, right? Which will then take the data or allow the data or the sensitivity matters to operate as it does, right? Hence, we have within the mental object base, Sukma Rupa there, right? Now, when we then look at Mano Dhatu and Mano Vinyana Dhatu, what do we see? One sector is completely devoted to the object, whilst the other sector operates conditioned by the object.
Okay.
Do you understand?
Yes.
Right?
Yes, Bhante.
One sector, think of it again, all the rest. One sector, Panchadvara Vajana and two Sampatichana, are devoted to the collection of that object. However, all the rest of the consciousnesses operate conditioned by that object.
Right, right.
Yeah.
That explains, Bhante, that explains why it comes under contiguity condition or the
Absolutely. We won't go into, yes.
No, yeah, just mention
Patthana today, but
yeah.
Patthana is also going to come in the next chapter. So
yeah.
huh?
Yeah. No. Ah. It's
Bhante, can I ask a question, please?
Bill.
Yeah. Bhante, what you're explaining is that what is on page 146, the 5 elements of sense conscious, where I dig that table, and there it gives the mind element and the mind conscious element, and then explains about the weak base. Is that what we're talking about? Look, page 146, Bhante. I'm just trying to see if in the past what I have read some time ago, whether that's what we are discussing now. There it gives you about the 7 conscious elements, and it gives you I conscious all, and it gives the mind element, Panchadvarana and the 2 receiving consciousness, and the mind conscious element, we gives all remaining chittas. And then the paragraphs underneath are explaining what the mind element is, the Mano Dhatu and the Mano Vinyana. Is this what is explained here in all these paragraphs, what you're explaining now, is that the same?
Well,
So
I can't really remember exactly what is in these paragraphs.
Page 146.
Yes, I can see it. Yes. And I mean, we can read it for sure. But the mind element offers independence on the heart. The 33 chittas enumerated here. Let me share the screen for everyone's convenience. All right. Here we'll read from here. Guide to verse 21. The 5 elements of the sense consciousnesses, etc. In the Abhidhamma, all 89 types of chitta are distributed among 7 consciousness elements, Vijnana Dhatu, as follows. The 3 chittas called mind element, Mano Dhatu, involve a very weak grasp of the object. The 5 do advance, so this is what we just mentioned. The 5 do adverting consciousness, because it encounters an utterly novel object and is followed by chitta with a different base. The 2-fold receiving consciousness, because it follows a chitta with a different base. The 5 elements of the sense consciousness are slightly stronger. The 5 elements of the sense consciousness are slightly stronger because they directly see, hear, smell, taste, or touch the object. But they are still relatively weak because they come between 2 chittas with bases different than their own. The chittas collected under mind consciousness element, mano vinyana dhatu, being preceded and followed by chittas which share their own base, are capable of a fuller and clearer cognitive grasp of their object. But the mind element occurs independent on the heart. The 33 chittas enumerated here do not arise in the immaterial world, but only in worlds where matter exists. Hence, they are always supported by the heart base. The chittas accompanied by aversion. So, okay. So, yes. So, essentially, yes.
Thank you, Bhante.
Page number
288.
Right now we are on 289.
All right, 288.
Artist, yeah.
Verse 38.
Yes, 288 and 289.
The 4 noble truths are: 1, the noble truth of suffering, the noble truth of suffering, the noble truth of the origin of suffering, the noble truth of the cessation of suffering, and the noble truth of the path leading to the cessation of suffering. Guide to verse 38. The 4 noble truths are the fundamental teaching of the Buddha, discovered by him on the night of his enlightenment and expounded by him repeatedly during his long ministry. These 4 truths are called noble because they are penetrated by the noble ones, because they are the truths taught by the Supreme Noble One, the Buddha, Supreme Noble One, the Buddha, because their discovery leads to the state of a Noble One, and because they are the real, unalterable, undeceptive truths about existence. The noble truth of suffering is expounded as 12-fold, right? Could you also, is there a chart following? No, there is no chart. Please highlight this section as well, please. Again, Dhamma Sangani, this will arise, right? The 4 noble, okay. The noble truth of suffering is expounded as 12-fold. The suffering of birth, aging, death, sorrow, lamentation, pain, grief, despair, association with the unpleasant, separation from the pleasant, not to get what one wants, and the 5 aggregates of clinging, right? The 5 aggregates of clinging, right? Now, when we sort of approach the subject of the noble truths, we can also go back to when we spoke about the word and the scope of the word, the scope that the word has. Essentially, the word is not what is talked about, it is the scope of that word. Do you understand? Is that clear? It's a huge difference when it comes to contemplation, right? We can look at lamentation as one, right? But this word lamentation, the meaning or how this word relates to you in your contemplative essence is unique and different when compared to all of us. It exaggerates upon a feeling, but that feeling is given value and meaning through the experiences that we have in our life, right? So when we go through the words, the suffering of birth, aging, death, sorrow, lamentation, pain, grief, despair, association with the unpleasant, separation from the pleasant, not to get what one wants, and the 5 aggregates of clinging, all of these things are associated to a meaning that we have given it. Remember, we are not talking about the word, we are talking about the meaning or the scope of that word. That is essentially that object of, or that is where awareness now sheds a light upon, right? Where awareness then sheds a light upon. Concisely, sorry. Concisely, the noble truth of suffering comprises all phenomena of the 3 mundane planes of existence, except craving. Could you highlight that, please, or underline it? Right? Concisely, the noble truth of suffering comprises all phenomena of the 3 mundane planes of existence, except craving. Highlight that. You will need that again for the Dhamma Center. All right. The noble truth of the origin of suffering. The noble truth of the origin of suffering is a single factor, namely craving, which is identical with the Chetasika of greed, lobha. Is that clear now? Everything other than craving is suffering, and the noble truth of the origin of suffering is craving, tanha, which is identical with the Chetasika of greed, lobha. Right? So could you also highlight or underline is a single factor, namely craving, which is that part, which is the definition, which is identical with the Chetasika of greed. Craving, however, has 3 aspects. Kama tanha, the craving for sensual pleasures. Bhava tanha, the craving for continued existence. And the craving for annihilation, vibhava tanha. Kama tanha, bhava tanha, and vibhava tanha. Right? And vibhava tanha. All of which is the Chetasika of greed. All of which it is the Chetasika of greed. The noble truth of the cessation of suffering is also singlefold. It is Nibbana, which is to be realized by the eradication of craving. Right? Which is to be realized by the eradication of craving. The noble truth of the way to the cessation of suffering is a noble eightfold path. In the teachings is the noble eightfold path. In the teachings of the Four Noble Truths, this is a collection of 8 Chetasikas corresponding to the 8 path factors arisen in the chittas of the 4 supramundane paths, right? Which arises in the chittas of the 4 supramundane paths. We already know this. It is when these 8 Chetasikas arise in balance and devoted, committed towards Nibbana, that we are able to attain the state which is known as Nibbana. Right? It should be noted that while in the section on the requisites of enlightenment, the 8 path factors may be either mundane or supramundane, in the teaching of the Four Noble Truths, they are exclusively supramundane. They are exclusively supramundane. So this
Bhante.
paragraph, I would like you to underline or highlight, is the
Excuse
Noble
me,
Eightfold Path. Hold on, Devika. Is
Okay,
the
okay,
Noble
sorry.
Eightfold Path. Right? Please underline that. This part.
Yes.
And in the paragraph above, underline it is Nibbana. That part. Right? You have to, even if you are to sort of code this on another page, that would be good, because you will need this section to define when we break down the categories of the Dhamma Center. Right? Yes, Devika.
What I want to mention is, Bhante, in this guide to 38, when we were going through the noble truth of being, of the origin of suffering, after that first paragraph, there is another little paragraph which we didn't go through, because every time I go through, I highlight.
Okay.
The Abhidhamma text explains that part. Craving for continued existence as lust, accompanied by that part we didn't go through, because every time we go through a section, I underline.
Is that here? I don't.
It's there in this page 289 under guide 238. First is the Four Noble Truths, then the Noble Truth of Suffering, then comes the Noble Truth of the origin of suffering. So we went through the first paragraph of that. Then there's another little paragraph after that, which says the Abhidhamma texts explain craving for continued existence as lust, accompanied by the view of existence. Bhavaditti, that is by the...
That is unfortunately not my book.
Not in your book?
No.
It's in my, this Abhidhamma book.
Okay.
That part is there, Bhante. It says...
Devika, can I explain? Devika and I have got a different edition from the others, and that's why even before sometimes our charts are different. So I have the paragraph that she's saying, because I think...
All right. Dil, yes, could you read out that paragraph, please, for our knowledge?
Right. So this is the paragraph that comes. So the first paragraph is the noble truth of suffering, which you have. The next one is the noble truth of the origin of suffering, which you have. Now, after you finish that, right, there is this paragraph that Devika is reading out, and it says, the Abhidhamma text explains craving for continued existence as lust, accompanied by the view of existence, which is bhavaditti. That is, by the eternalist view, craving for non-existence as lust, accompanied by the view of non-existence, which is vibhavaditti, that is, by the annihilationist view. So that's the paragraph that she's speaking about.
And it says, see, it says VIBH number 916.
Vishuddhimagga. All right.
Visuddhimagga. Okay. Number 916.
No,
then,
VABH, Vibhavani. Okay.
Yeah.
VIBH or
VIBH.
Vibhavani. Okay.
Victor, India,
So
Brahma.
what essentially is mentioned in that paragraph, which most of us do not have, is the object taken by the tanha at that moment, which would then be defined as bhava tanha, kama tanha, bhava tanha, and vibhava tanha.
Okay.
Right? That is what is explained there, which is, for example, with regards to bhava tanha, the tanha takes as object the bhava ditti, the view of existence, right? In the third one, with vibhava tanha, tanha takes as object vibhava ditti, right? That is what it then mentions there. All right.
Okay. Thank you.
So, okay. Thank you, Devika and Dil, for bringing that up. Now, do we have any questions? Do we have any questions? The Four Noble Truths are exclusively refer to the supramundane path, unlike in the Eightfold Noble Path, which is defined in two ways, the mundane and the supramundane. When it comes to the noble truth of suffering, the noble truth of suffering is everything except nibbana and craving, right? And nibbana, craving, and the 8 chetasikas associated with enlightenment. Do you understand? Right? You have to subtract the enlightenment aggregate out of the suffering, because enlightenment does not cause suffering. It is the right opposite of that. And you have to take out what causes suffering, the origin of suffering, which is tanha. Right? Do you understand, everyone? Does everyone understand? Is that clear? No, that's not clear. So when we take the aggregate of suffering, let me see whether there's a chart. Yeah, no. So when we take the attribute of suffering, the noble truth of suffering, we have to take all the dhammas, all the phenomena in all of the consciousnesses, chetasikas, rupas, and nibbana, all of the 4 ultimate realities. What causes suffering? Do you understand? So all phenomena linked, it says here, to the 3 mundane planes of existence, except craving, causes suffering. Except craving causes suffering. Remember, linked to the mundane spheres. Right? So, Kama Bhumi, Rupa Vachara, Kama Vachara Bhumi, Rupa Vachara Bhumi, Arupa Vachara Bhumi, තිබෙන සියලු ධර්මයන් දුක්ඛ සත්‍යයට ඇතුල් වෙනවා. Except tanha. Do you understand why that is? Because all of those phenomena cause suffering, even the jhanas. How do the jhanas cause suffering is then the question. How do the dhyanas cause suffering? Padma, any thoughts?
Well, I was wondering whether it's the trying to persevere to achieve more, whether that's a suffering there. Trying to go from one jhana to another, losing certain things. Whether that could be suffering.
Okay. Any other? Samantha, what do you think, Samantha?
I was just saying, is it because the hindrances are only temporarily suppressed?
The hindrances are temporarily suppressed. Okay.
In the jhana.
Yeah.
So when you come out of jhanas, you still got the hindrances.
But
5 hindrances.
Okay. Anyone else? Any more thoughts?
Bhante,
Yes.
is it the sort of craving for continuous existence in the jhana sphere, or the condition of jhana, to have actually it's something to do with bhava tanha. So once you are in the jhana, you like you crave to be in the jhana, right? And so that actually the cause of suffering.
Okay, okay. Anything else? Yes, Devika.
Maybe by trying to cling to the jhana and you don't want to fall out of it, and there comes tanha, craving to hold on to it without losing it. Maybe that causes.
Chamari?
Bhante, could it be also because it doesn't last? Even a jhana does not last, so it is anitya. And that which is anitya is dukkha.
Yes, that is the exact reason, right? All of your answers are correct, right? But
the explanation,
if you are to nail it on the head, it is Chamari's answer.
Chamari, yes. Thank you, Chamari. That's why I didn't know how to express it. Chamari did. That's why. Thank you.
Right. So it is because it is so anything which creates sankharas, which jhanas do, and due to those sankharas are then impermanent. All sankharas are impermanent. The only thing that does not create sankharas in that manner are the parts of the enlightenment path. It removes those sankharas. Do you understand? Right? That is why the jhana path too is included. The rupa vachara and the arupa vachara is included within the dukkha khanda. Right? Now, then we come to the noble truth of suffering, the noble truth of the origin of suffering, which is craving. Right? Now, craving is, we will study when we go further into the patthana. Craving is one of those factors within our being which facilitates the continuity of the sankharas, the continuity of the production of sankharas, right? And because of this craving, if we might sort of use, like sort of fueling the fire in a way, right? What craving does is it creates the jivita indriya force, which then creates that continuity in our life. The repeated attachment from patisandhi to the bhavangas to the objects to identity to everything, all of those things are rooted into this function of craving performed by the cetasika of greed. Right? By that cetasika of greed. Right? The noble truths of the cessation of suffering is also single-fold. It is nibbana. The cessation of suffering comes through the experience or the attainment of nibbana. And the noble truth of the way to the cessation of suffering are the 8 path factors, which are rather the 8 chetasikas, which correspond to the 8 path factors. Right? The 8 chetasikas. So when it comes to the path of meditation, what we essentially do is we try to understand the noble truth of suffering. The noble truth of suffering. The noble truth of suffering. And through the understanding of the noble truth of suffering, have the prajna, the meditative ability to now see the association of greed within our life to bring to balance the 8 path factors, which would enable us to then attain nibbana. Is that understood? Dukkha therum ganīmen දුකට හේතුව තේරුම් ගන්නවා. දුකට හේතුව තේරුම් ගැනීමෙන් අපි Eightfold අෂ්ටාංගික මාර්ගයේ තිබෙන ඒ චෛතසික ධර්ම භාවනාමය ඥානෙ බැලන්ස් කරන්න උත්සාහවත් වෙනවා. ඒ බැලන්ස් එක අපිට හම්බුනාට පස්සේ we are able to attain nibbana. Right? All right. So, any questions before we move to the next part?
Bhante,
Yes, ma'am.
could you kindly explain the word Vibhavatanha? I'm a bit confused. Sort of, there are lots of explanations and I'm not clear about it.
Right. What is Vibhavatanha? Right? Kama tanha is a craving that we have towards the sensual pleasures. Bhavatanha is a craving that we have towards the need to exist again and again and again, right? To be, right? Now here the word bhava, right, is translated as to be, right? Which is far more, the scope of it is far more than existence, really. Because when we hear the word existence, as we have seen here, craving for continued existence. Now, this continued existence, we feel, or we might, with the first glance, we might think, this is about Patisanti, rebirth and death. But really, that is too narrow of a scope for Bhavatanha. Bhavatanha is to be in every moment, regardless of kaya marana. Regardless of kaya marana, to be in every moment. This is the effective grasp of self in every moment of life within a person who lives without awareness. We apply again and again and again sakasanya or sakkaya ditthi, right? The view of self. That is what the scope of Bhavatanha is. When it comes to Vibhavatanha, Vibhavatanha is the association of mind. We might think that this is, or sometimes, it's like without a Dhamma practice, we hope for the ending of samsara. But with no understanding whatsoever of the Dhamma, of Nibbana, what Nibbana is, what are the pillars of existence, no understanding at all. But we hope for this thing called Nibbana, which is a state of emptiness, we've heard. That aligns more with the wrong view of annihilation. How do we divide, or how do we clearly know this? Because both Bhavatanha and Vibhavatanha are rooted in delusion. Do you understand? Without Samma Ditti, when one thinks that one is going to, without samadhi, that one wants to get rid, one wants to end, that aligns with the view of annihilation, not with the view of Nibbana. That is what Vibhavatanha is. Do you understand? Right? Now, Vibhavatanha, Venerable Jnanatiloka has given this definition of Vibhavatanha. I will read it to you. Right? Vibhavatanha. craving for non-existence or for self-annihilation, right? I think that there are many different reasons why one might crave for Nibbana, but I think that some of them are in fact exhibiting craving for non-existence. Do you understand that point? The craving for non-existence is not the need or desire to attain enlightenment.
Bhante, can I just
That,
answer?
hold on one moment. That is clear to us when we, even with, when we went through, even with the Anapanasati Sutra, if you remember the first part of the Anapanasati Sutra, we spoke about the inclinations that the bhikkhus, the Arya bhikkhus had upon what was taught to the younger monks. It spoke of the devotion, the commitment, the shraddha, the faith the monks had in those specific practices, but not specifically upon Nibbana. Nibbana was defined not as a state, but a path which was approachable through following the Satyesha Bodhisparshaka Dhamma. Do you understand? Right? Now, let's take Nibbana, which is attained with all of these practices leading to Nibbana. Take these practices away. Now, this has no meaning whatsoever. That is the annihilation view. Mokada, why doesn't it attribute to Nibbana? Because we don't know anything about it. We've not experienced it. It doesn't mean anything to us. So what we would do with our mundane minds is attribute Nibbana to something that is mundane, and that is illusion. Do you understand? Is that clear? That is the self-annihilation view.
But can I ask what I want
Yes.
to? Yeah. So the way I understand it, when you did the suttas before, now we have Sammaditthi, but you have Sakkaditthi. So you have those 62 different views. And so in those extremes of the views that we had, one was this eternalist view, which is the Bhavaditti, and other one is the annihilationist view, which is what you're explaining, the Vibhavaditti, which is because of the Vibhava. So those are the two extremes, and they're quite different because they're still dittis. We are imagining eternalism, we are imagining annihilism because we are still mundane minds. But Nibbana is totally nothing to do with those views, because that's something that you realize with the mundane mind cannot comprehend. So that's why Nibbana is far, far away from this annihilationist, with that annihilationist view that we mundane people think it is and can get confused. But they are actually the two, out of the 62 dittis you have, they are the two, sort of one is this annihilationist view and other one is the eternalist view, the Bhavaditti and the Vibhavaditti. So Nibbana is totally away from all that, because that's something you realize and which we cannot comprehend, like these 62 dittis and these two dittis, which is just a Sakkaya Ditti, which is the wrong way.
Yes. It also mentions, yes, thank you, dear, for sharing. It also mentions there is a sutra which mentions that when the Buddha talks about approaching the subject or approaching the practice or the element of Nibbana, that a person who is a nihilist can relate far more easier to a state of Nibbana than an eternalist. Right? That is also mentioned within the sutra, right? Where the Buddha says everything is a flame, experience is a flame, the sense desire is a flame. The sense bases are a flame, the elements are a flame, right? And he goes on to say or make this remark where a person who is a nihilist is able to, with ease, relate to a state of nibbana compared to an eternalist, right? But this is only to say that this person can now work his way to understanding what true nibbana is rather than anything else. It is not in any way saying that with this wrong view you can attain nibbana. It is saying that that person who might have that wrong view is able to actually see and experience nibbana in the future, because yes, the difference between the nibbana and this nihilistic view is that when it comes to the object of nibbana, you have a substance behind it, right? Which all the more glorifies dharma for me personally, which again reattributes to the importance of prajna in everyday practice and everything you practice. When the prajna element is taken away, the practice that you think is a practice is now no longer the practice. Yes, Chamari.
Bhante, I have heard that it's the Shaswata Ditti that Buddha had said is workable on the path instead of the Uchedavada, because with the Shaswata Ditti, you at least believe that you are born again. So at least there is life after this life, or am I getting mixed up?
I think
what you're saying?
It is in the Diganaka Sutta. I will copy the sutra here. It is in the Diganaka Sutta, Chamari. I've copied the link here. There are two sutras. I will copy both sutra links. And it is in these two sutras that the Buddha states that it is actually the nihilist rather than the eternalist. So you could refer to these sutras.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you, Bhante. I will.
Yeah. Yes, Samantha.
Yeah, Bhante, I too was just wondering that little fine line between annihilation and nibbana. Now, because nibbana is also, in a way, your say if I'll say I want to get enlightened and reach the state of nibbana, is that I'm not going to be reborn. I'm ending my life, but so when I die, basically. But then the difference would be annihilation. It seems to be like a very dark side, that you're sort of like suicidal sort of thoughts. But whereas nibbana, I'm eradicating all my defilements and my future karmas, sankharas, and I'm still existing in this, say, like Buddha was, when arahants, they still live, but they've eradicated everything, and is that purity of the mind? Is that with all the defilements being anusaya kilesas and all that being eradicated? In a blissful state they live.
I think this is the exact reason why this definition of vibhavatannaha exists, where we attempt to give gross examples, or we tend to understand a very subtle phenomena, fine phenomena with the grossness of the mundane world. I think that is the exact reason, or that is the exact fact behind the vibhavatannaha right there. Right? Because now, Samantha, for you personally, if we are to take you or anyone else in this class as a matter, the reason that we might sort of see, or the scope, for example, if we take a year and a half or 2 or 3 years or 5 years ago, before you really started studying Dhamma, right? When you might have been young, just come to the UK, had no idea. Nibbana then and Nibbana now is very different to you. Why? Because of the practice that we have come to know, right? Because of the practice. Also, Samantha, when we go through, especially now we can, quote the Anapanasati Sutra because we've gone through that chapter, that part, and also the Satipatthana Sutra, we find again and again the bhikkhus, the Arya Sangha, their teachings were not focused upon this zest towards Nibbana, but it was a focus zest upon that which is to be attained at this moment. Do you understand what I mean there?
No, sorry, could you just explain that again?
For example, let's take a bala, right? A power, right? We have the indriyas and then we have the balas. Let's take an indriya, right? With the indriya, we have something, right? Shabda indriya. No, let's take the prajna indriya, right? The prajna indriya cultivates and develops to a more stable form known as the prajna bala or the panya bala, right? The word indriya comes from the Sanskrit word, which is the tool of God, right? The weapon of God, Indra's weapon, right? Now, when we take the prajna indriya, the prajna indriya connotes and resembles an exact practice for us to follow in order to gain a specific skill. A skill of practice, a skill of mind, a skill of being, a skill of life. Through this skill, we come to attain to a stage of enlightenment, to a stage of enlightenment. That is also what this part resembles right here, remember. It is in the balancing of the 8 Chetasikas corresponding to the 8 path factors that we attain to the noble truth of the cessation of suffering, which is single-fold, it is Nibbana. Do you understand? Now just imagine, we know through our Abhidhamma study that the 8 elements of Nibbana cannot be taken as object by a mundane being. Right? When it cannot be taken as object by a mundane being because we simply do not have the capacity or the state of mind supportive of resonating with that level of enlightenment. Because of that fact, we find ourselves unable to take it as object. So then, what are we referring to as Nibbana? Dannati deyak kerehi komada api dharmanukulawa katuyutu karanne.
Yeah.
Do you understand?
Yeah, sort of. Yes. Thank you, Bhante. Yeah.
That is what the Vibhava Tanha is then. Right? The Buddha has in no way promoted a practice which you do not know anything about. That is why, of course, we have these very profound teachings, the Eightfold Noble Paths, the Paticcasamuppada, the Patthana, and all of these teachings. But we also have Sila. We also have Demaupiyanta Salakanna. We also have Guruvurunta Gaurav Karanna. To respect your teachers, to respect your parents, to have gratitude, to have loving kindness, to treat animals properly. We also have that part. Why? To give essence and meaning to what enlightenment is. A kisiwak nati kenekta nirvana avabodha wenne. That is Vibhava Tanha. Or rather, let's forget about the word Tanha, that's Vibhava Ditti. Right? So, for example, now I don't know anything about construction, right? So if someone was to say, okay, let's break down the temple or the house or whatnot, You know, for me, in my head, it would simply be, okay, let's bring a bulldozer and just break it, right? Or maybe take a hammer and beat down the walls, or take off the roof or something like that. I wouldn't even know how to take off the roof, right? But a builder, you give it to a builder, right? The builder will remove the things that you can use again, right? He will do it in a systematic way where you will not be sort of harmed in the process, right? Now, me thinking that I can take down a house or fix a pipe or, you know, fix a piece of electrical something, you know, whatever, anything beyond fixing a light bulb, sometimes not even a light bulb, is mere delusion. Is mere delusion, right? It is to take away one's dependent upon a state of delusion, that is what Vibhava Tanha refers to. Is that clear, everyone?
And also, Bhante, I mean, in the stage of an Arahant, they would have just their existence is just a separation of seeing the impermanence of the 5 aggregates. So they would have just, you know, just really separated all the 5 aggregates and just see the arising, passing of each one. And that's how they live. It's just emptiness of there. So is that what they mean by that?
Which is a skill that they have developed over their time of practice.
Yeah.
Right? Which is a skill that they develop over a time of practice. And if we know anything at all, it is that the path towards enlightenment, this is the most methodical, systematic path that I would say with confidence that any religion offers. Right? We have a systematic, methodical approach which leads to Nibbana. Right? That is actually the same point that people take to debate the fact that Buddhism is not a philosophy, because a philosophy can have many points of views and many outcomes. We have one outcome, Nibbana. Because of that reason, it doesn't fit into the definition of a philosophy.
Yeah.
Right? So all of those states that we experience, we know we can't reach the 5th jhana without the 1st, 2nd, 3rd, and the 4th jhana. We can't go into the Arupavachara jhanas without going through the Rupavachara jhana. We can't experience Upekka without going through Vitaka, Vichara, Priti, Sukha, Ekagata. Why? Because these pieces of experience teaches us something very profound, which gives us the reinforcement, the enforcement necessary to experience that high state of mind. Without practice, one will not have the skill set required to attain Nibbana. So without that practice, without any sort of knowledge of the practice, without any sort of understanding of these different pieces of insight, how are we to ever make a jnana sampayutta, somanasa sagata jnana sampayutta determination to attain Nibbana? Is it because of the grace of the Buddha? That does not exist. The grace of the Buddha does not exist. If the Buddha is not Jesus Christ or Allah or Krishna or Vishnu, the grace of the Buddha is a practice. That is Vibhava Tanha. Is that clear, everyone? Yes, Dil.
Thank you.
Dil, you're muted. Dil, you're still muted.
Okay. Can you hear me now, please?
Yes.
Yeah. So, Bhante, in the Aditya Pariyaya Sutta, not that Diga Nikanka, whatever the long name, see, that is why you're referring to in the nihilistic view, that at least you can have some kind of understanding, because everything is burning there. The I and the ear, nose and everything, and because everything is burning there, so it's like the annihilism, everything is burning. And therefore, this disenchantment, the nibbitante, the fading away, the viraga, then the liberation and the jnana comes in, and therefore all these things go, and they said those monks who had Gaya or whatever that place was, that they therefore realized the freed from the defilements, and they realized Nibbana. So that is the reason why the nihilistic view is a little bit easier to go to Nibbana than the eternalist view, because in this Aditya Paraya, exactly the Buddha talks about that.
Yeah.
Everything, anybody is burning. Thank you, Bhante. So in a way, it's a bit similar to the Ananta Lakkana Sutta also, where he was talking, and those same figures about disenchantment, and that when you talk about the Nibbitanti, the Viraga, and get with the jnana to get the vimukti. Both these things can, but this is with burning and with nihilism. Thank you, Bhante. Thank you for your explanation.
Yes. All right. Shall we move on then? Yeah. All right. Verse 39. A clarification. Herein, 69 states comprising 52 mental factors, 69 states comprising 52 mental factors, 16 kinds of subtle matter and nibbana are regarded as the mental object base and the mental object element, right? The mental object base and the mental object element. The mind base itself is divided into 7 elements of consciousness. The mind base itself is divided into 7 elements of consciousness. This part here. Yeah. Summary. Matter, feeling, perception, the remaining mental factors and consciousness, these 5 are called 5 aggregates. These 5 are called 5 aggregates. The same states that pertain to the 3 planes are regarded as the 5 aggregates of clinging. The same state that pertaining to the 3 mundane planes are regarded as the 5 aggregates of clinging. As Nibbana lacks differentiation, such as past, present, and future, it is excluded from the category of aggregates. Owing to the difference between those and objects, there are 12 sense bases in accordance with those objects, and there are corresponding consciousnesses arise the 18 elements. So meaning the mind base is divided, that 7 more is added there, right? The round of existence, because when we take the elements are such that they're displayed in that way because it has its own intrinsic function, right? Its own intrinsic function. The round of existence in the 3 planes is suffering. The round of existence in the 3 planes is suffering. Craving is its origin. Cessation is Nibbana. The path regarded as the supramundane. The path is regarded as a supramundane, right? Which is the last, is regarded as the supramundane. Mental states associated with the paths and fruits are excluded from the 4 truths. Mental states associated with the paths and the fruits are excluded from the 4 truths. Thus, the compendium of the whole has been explained in 5 ways, right? In 5 ways. Why are the mental states associated with the path and the fruits are all excluded from the 4 truths? Because it is in that realization. We are talking about the path, the 4 noble truths relate a path leading to Nibbana. And that is exactly what it says within the Four Noble Truths and its definitions. The paths and the fruits are the experiences of that said Nibbana. That is why it is excluded there. Okay? All right. Guide to verse 40. Mental states associated with the paths. Apart from the 8 chaisikars corresponding with the 8 path factors, the other constituents of supramundane path consciousness, the chitta itself and the associated chaisikars are not, strictly speaking, part of the Eightfold Noble Path. And thus they are not comprehended by the Four Noble Truths. The 4 fruits as well are excluded from the framework of the Four Noble Truths. Right? Is that understood? Do you understand why? Or I can explain it if you need me to explain why. Again, mental states associated with the paths. Yes, David, I will. Apart from the 8 chaisikars corresponding to the 8 path factors, meaning Arya Ashtanga Marga kotas vana a chaisika dharma 8. Right? The other constituents of the supramundane path consciousness, the chitta itself and the associated chaitasikas are not strictly speaking part of the Eightfold Noble Path. Right? Of the Eightfold Noble Path. Now here, remember, there is Samma Ditti, Samma Sankappa, Samma Ajiva, Vayama, Kammanta, Sati Samadhi, right? Virya, Sati Samadhi, Sati Samadhi, Samma Jnana, Samma Vimokha. Samma Jnana, Samma Vimokha, we don't really speak about it as a part of the main canon, because it has been later elucidated in the commentaries. But Samma Jnana, Samma Vimokha speak about the attainment of Nibbana and the experience of Nibbana. Samma Jnana, Samma Vimokha. Right? So the Eightfold Path and the Four Noble Truths, speaking upon the spirit of how to attain to this state of releasing oneself from the suffering. That is why, because that path is not suffering, the path and the fruit, that is why it is excluded from the Four Noble Truths. Because those paths is a result, not the path. Also, a common misconception that we have is when we refer to in the sutra, in the way of the sutras, to a certain extent, when we refer to path, we refer to the path from the beginning of your journey towards enlightenment, the attainment to enlightenment, right? But when we go through the scope of this sort of definitions which are given by the Abhidhamma, we refer to an exact moment which changes or puts you through a process of metamorphosis, where you now change completely from a mundane being to a supramundane being, from a Lokiya Puggala to now a Arya Puggala. That is the path that we are referring to here. Essentially, the path beginning from your need to attain Nibbana up until the whole attainment of Nibbana does not really elucidate upon the path. It is only your personal journey. Still, we have not experienced the path and the fruit. The first time that we ever do experience the path is with the attainment of the Sotapanna stage, not with the Chanda, not with the desire to attain to the noble path, but with the exact attainment of the Sotapanna stage. Hence, the 8 paths and fruits are taken out of the 4 noble truths and the Eightfold Noble Path. Do you understand? Mokada, why, if we are to define suffering and the way leading to suffering, just think, would it be fair, would it be right, not fair, but right, to include the result in the path? Simply, that is your answer. It wouldn't be right to include the answer, the result of that, in the path. The Eightfold Noble Path and the 4 Noble Truths elucidate upon the path, not what you're going to get afterwards. Yes? All right. So, Pachya. Wow. Okay, very, very excited for this next class. Patana Damsiri is going to be dancing next week to the sounds of Patana. All right. So we will close the session for today, right? But we will collect back from next week. Do we have any questions before we do have a bit of time? So if anyone has any questions, yes, Padma.
Can you please elucidate the 8 Chetasikas that correspond to the 8 path factors? We're trying to work it out.
Yes.
Of course, there's Panya, all that is there, but I can't get all of them.
Okay. So Samma Ditti, which one is it? Let's do it together.
Samma Ditti will be wisdom, isn't it?
Right. Samma Sankappa, right thought.
Right thought. Mindfulness. Mindfulness.
Then what is mindfulness?
Mindfulness will be sati, wouldn't it?
Initial application.
So mindfulness is sati. Initial application, correct.
Yeah.
Correct. So Vitakka is Samma Sankappa. Samma Vayama, no.
Will be energy.
Samma Vacha Kammanta Jiva.
Samma Vacha.
Yeah, that's right speech.
Right. Yeah, those 3 are there.
Right action and right livelihood.
Those 3 are in the abstinences anyway, so that's correct.
3 abstinences.
Yeah.
And
so now where are we now? Wisdom, speech,
Next one is right effort.
Samma Vacha, Samma Kammanta, Ajiva, Vaya.
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 Is Virya.
Yeah. Yeah, Virya is that, yeah.
Virya. Samma Sati is Sati.
Sati, yeah.
Samma
Mindfulness.
One-pointedness. Yeah.
There you have it.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think the one you missed is Vitakka, isn't it?
Vitakka, yeah, yeah. That's right. I wasn't sure whether that is because that's in the jhanas. I wasn't sure whether that goes into the Eightfold Noble Path, but okay, that's fine.
But remember,
Right consciousness is the 4 jhanas.
right thought, you mean?
4 jhanas of the Suttanta system or something?
No. Remember the Vitakka in Samma Samma Ditti Samma Sankappa is not referring to the same aspect of Vitakka in the jhanas.
Oh, I see. Right. Okay.
You know,
Right.
so when, for example, in this last part we just read, it said take out the consciousnesses, mental factors associated with the path and the fruits.
Okay. Yeah.
Right. So even the Chetasikas, so then if we think in that way, the Chetasikas, when we take out the path and fruit, the Sobhana Chetasikas, beautiful Chetasikas will all be gone.
Oh, yeah.
But the thing is, on a different level, on a mundane level, those also are included within the Dukkha Kanda.
Right. Yeah. Okay. Yeah, because it can be both mundane and supramundane, isn't it?
Yes.
Yeah.
So the vitakka in jhana supports the vitakka in
The mundane.
vitakka in the Aryashtangika marga.
Right.
Support.
But in the mundane, or in both. Yeah, okay.
In both.
In both, yeah.
In both.
Okay.
Because when you go through jhana into vipassana,
Yeah.
when you use the jhanas to go into vipassana,
Yeah.
right? Now you're using a skill you developed elsewhere to now go into vipassana, which is something else.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah. Right. Thank you. Yeah.
Yes.
But yeah, no, just to go through the when we're looking at the Aryashtangika Marga, now we said that Samma Sankappa was initial application. So why? What about sustained application? Why only initial application?
Because it is through thought arises through that element of the initial application, because that is what adverts to the object that arises.
Oh, I see. So, right. So when you go down the list, so you have samadhi.
We are not referring to the sustenance of thought. We are referring to thought. Thought arises because of vitakka.
Right. Right.
The
Okay.
sustenance of vitakka, sustenance of the thought can be vichara, but that is not what we are referring to here.
Right. Right. It's just getting the application of getting rid of thought.
No, thought itself. Meaning, when we are now seasoned by Dhamma, the thought that arises through two changes, Samma Ditti, Samma Sankappa. Samma Ditti, the thought pattern now is influenced by Samma Ditti, not Miccha Ditti, which we might have had earlier. That is, so it is essentially referring to the thought, not about the processes of the thought. What supports, conditions, or nurtures now the thoughts that arise? Samma Ditti. Yeah.
So, yeah. So again, when you look at all the other factors, right? The right view, when you look at it as a Cetasika, as a mental factor. Now there is wrong view, which is one of the unwholesome Pakinaka, the occasional. Right view, where is right view there? Effort is virya. So that's the, yeah. So that's no Cetasika Samadhi. There is one-pointedness, which is samadhi. There's mindfulness, which is sati, and prajna is there then, but then that is not included. Yeah, but prajna is, so samadhi is prajna, is it?
Yes.
Ah, okay. Thank you, Bhante.
Yeah.
Right. Okay.
Yeah. That is why they specifically categorically say that the attainment of nibbana is associated with samadhi and samma sankappa, rather than anything else.
Yes.
All the rest only support samadhi and samma sankappa.
Thank you, Bhante.
Yeah. Yeah. Again, sort of reiterating the fact that without prajna, the path does not exist. Right. So when the Buddha said, to put it, bluntly, fools can't attain nibbana, this was what he was meaning. A fool means a person who is not operating with wisdom in their lives, who is conditioned like a coconut tree being blown into all sides with the wind, dependent upon the wind that blows. Right? There is no sort of structure to that mind, because what unwholesome does, if we know anything about unwholesome, is destroy structure, destroy reason, destroy logic, destroy the inability to think properly, destroys confidence. Whereas prajna forms confidence, brings in a structure, brings in a discipline to the mind, which then gives you the ability to sort of yoke the mind in the way that you want to yoke it.
But I think why a lot of people, particularly Westerners, take offense, because when you say, Vinyohiti, they think it's this, that if you are not cognitively bright, but actually what Buddha is talking of with wisdom, panya.
Yeah.
But what people think is, when you say it's only for the wise, for each one for himself, they think of this cognitive thing. So they think that, unlike Christ, who was very compassionate to everybody, that the Buddha wants only the very clever ones. But that's not what he meant, that you have to have the wisdom, the panna. But these people think that is IQ and cognition. And that's why this whole thing, that the Buddha's thing is only for the wise, but that's why the Sammaditi. So we understand it, we realize it, that's not what, you can be very, very clever, but if you don't have panya, right, then this path is, you're not even starting with Sammaditi, because you'll be so ego-led.
Yeah.
And you can't even. Thank you, Bhante.
Absolutely.
It's all sense, isn't it?
Yes, very much, very much. All right. So what I would recommend to you is with this chapter, the definitions that you have over the 5 different sectors that have been elucidated, please go through the definitions and highlight the definitions and have them, right? Have them with you, because it is important to understand the definition, because now it is through those 5. Skandha, Ayatana, Dhatu, Satcha, and Khanda. Skandha, Ayatana, Dhatu, Satcha. Skandha, Ayatana, Dhatu, Satcha. 4. Skandha, Ayatana, Dhatu, Satcha. It is through these 4 that all the next book, which is the Dhamma Sangani, is going to depend on. Everything from every consciousness group, Chaitasika group, Rupa group, Khanda group, everything has to be divisible into Skandha, Ayatana, Dhatu, Satcha. That is what the Dhamma Sangani is. So essentially this chapter, what it expresses are those parts which is then required for your Dhamma Sangani study. So make sure that you know what the definitions are, right? And have it by your side, have your own resource sheet or whatever, which is convenient to you. All right. So then I will see you on Wednesday. Take care and have a good, pleasant rest of the evening. They're on Sunday.
Thank you.
Everyone have a nice.
Bye, Bhante.
Good night.